I think this one's ready to use. Looks like it's been oxidizing or something. Maybe I dropped it in the tea. Welcome to the Townsends book club here. We're in the Nutmeg Tavern, kind of special session. We're going to be digging more into the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, which is just good week after week. We can just take it in little tiny bits, and still there's just tons in this book. I just love it. Ryan mentioned, somebody mentioned in the chat there on the other side of the time vortex, that someone said they got a catalog in the mail. My question is, did you get it in a box or did you get the catalog in the actual mail? Because I haven't heard whether these guys are hitting people's mailboxes yet. So I'm excited to hear that. So if you did get your catalog in the mail, please tell me about it. If you're interested in one of our catalogs, you can find it. You can find a link on our website to go request a catalog. We'll send you one in bulk mail. Take a little bit, but you'll get it eventually. The mail is a little weird these days. Someone sent me a postcard. Took 10 days to get here. Okay.
They were home by the time we got to.
And of course, the funny thing is there is a section in this part where he talks about being the postmaster and all that good stuff. I'll bet the mail was faster in Benjamin Franklin's day. Oh boy.
They said in the actual mail.
In the actual mail.
In the actual mail. That's what they said.
Thank you very much for keeping me updated. I will tell the customer service folks downstairs that tell me what state you're in. It's just back and forth, one person here. We are on page 126 of this version of the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. You can find it on our website. Again, if you want this particular printed copy, you can also find it online, many places, and even free on archive.org or Google Books. So we're beginning right here at the bottom of page 126. Last week, we got done talking about, the university and that building, and what was the other part of it? I can't even remember now. Anyway, here he starts off this section. When I disengaged myself, as above mentioned, from private business, I flattered myself that by the sufficient, though moderate fortune that I had acquired, I had secured leisure during the rest of my life. So it's sort of a kind of retirement. Leisure during the rest of my life for philosophical studies and amusements, which is pretty much what I do. I purchased all of Dr. Spence's apparatus, who had come from England to lecture here, and I proceeded in my electrical experiments with great alacrity. But the public, now considering me as a man of leisure, laid hold of me for their purposes, every part of our civil government, and almost at the same time imposing some duty upon me. The governor put me into the commission of the peace. The corporation of the city chose me of the common council, and soon after an alderman, and the citizens at large chose me as a burgess to represent them in the assembly. So like a congressman to the state senate. This latter station was more agreeable to me, as I was at length tired with sitting there to hear debates in which, as a clerk, I could take no part, and which were often so unentertaining that I was induced to amuse myself with making magic squares or circles, or anything to avoid weariness. So here he was, clerk of the assembly, having to write down all the minutes and everything that was going on, and they were all so intensely boring. And here he talks about doing magic squares and circles. Those are little numerical puzzles, sort of like Sudoku, or Sudoku, however you say it. So can you imagine? It's just like you're the clerk, yeah, whatever, playing tic-tac-toe with yourself, or something very similar.
Sounds very fun, riveting.
Well, I mean, at least now he gets to engage, and probably, somebody would, get up on their hind legs and say something silly, and he would Well, he would probably do his very best to not say mean things to him. At least he would try. Inside, he was saying things like that. He thought it was. He was. You know, he's coming from a lower set, as he said, considering my low beginning. He was impressed or whatever that he was pleased that people were excited to have him be in these different kinds of offices. It's like, I'm just a lowly, printer and the son of a soap maker, and he gets to, be in all these different offices. He, it's definitely public life instead of, private business. He was for a while in the office of Justice of the Peace, so sort of a low level judge, but as he says here, but finding that more knowledge of the common law than I possessed was necessary to act in that station with credit, I gradually withdrew from it, and excusing myself from being obligated to attend the higher duties. So here it's like, yeah, I can do that, but, does he need one more thing to really have to dig in? And here you see some ethics. He could probably have been Justice of the Peace all day long if he wanted to, regardless of his knowledge of the law. It's like, but I'll just read it one way or the other. And here he's like, no, to do this right, I'd have to be a lot more, I'd have to read a lot more law and actually, do it right. So I probably shouldn't do that, which is pretty neat. Here he's talking about being in the legislature. He says, my election to this trust was repeated every year for 10 years without my ever asking any elector for his vote or signifying either directly or indirectly any desire of being chosen. So it's like, whether he likes it or not, they wanted him to be there, which is, pretty neat that he would, number one, that you could sort of have that. In this day and age, people just don't randomly sort of, well, we're going to elect you to be in Congress, whether you like it or not. He's like, well, I didn't ask anybody for that vote, but they wanted me to be there, so I'll do it. I'll do that as an office to the public. So he was, and apparently his son here afterwards, since he couldn't be clerk anymore, his son is going to be clerking for that, doing that office. Appointed that. I don't think he doesn't say, I wanted my son to be that. He just says my son was appointed. So I don't know whether he, said was trying
championed it or not.
Right, whether he was trying to make that happen. There's a whole page and a third here about dealing with being part of the negotiations with Native Americans, and I'm not gonna dig deep into it. There's a whole section here where he talks about the problem of basically alcoholism within the Native American community, and dealing with them in the negotiations and what happened afterwards. But he does say something like, definitely saying this is an overall problem with the entire community, and it's not good for them. It doesn't work out well. I don't know how to go beyond it further than that, except to say that he, he certainly isn't saying I don't know how to answer that. If you're interested in what he has to say, check that page. It's about a page and a third, where he kind of specifically talks about that engagement with that particular cultural group and the outcome of that. But it doesn't really go very far. let's see here. The next section, a doctor, Bond, comes to him, and this is 1751. He says, a particular friend of mine conceived the idea of establishing a hospital in Philadelphia, a very beneficent design, which has been ascribed to me, but was originally his, for the reception and cure of poor sick persons, whether inhabitants of the province or strangers. He was zealous and active in endeavoring to procure subscriptions for it, but the proposal, being a novelty in America and at first was not well understood, he met with small success. So we don't think twice about the idea of hospitals. Every community has a hospital, has multiple hospitals. We know what they're for. We know who's in them. But here it's like, we should have a hospital in the colonies someplace, right? And here's the doctor. He says, can I get people interested in helping to pay for this hospital? And no interest. So Benjamin Franklin. At length, he came to me with the compliment that he found that there was no such thing as carrying a public-spirited project through without my being concerned in it. For, he says, I am often asked by those to whom I propose subscribing, have you consulted Franklin upon this business? And what does he think of it? And when I tell them that I have not, supposing it rather out of my line, they do not subscribe, but they say they'll consider of it. So, everybody's like, oh, well, so this is a public kind of thing. Well, has Benjamin Franklin talked? Have you talked to Benjamin Franklin? What does he think about it? Well, the first or second time he heard that, he probably should have just stopped right then and just, he's like, okay, obviously I need to go talk to Benjamin Franklin. So Benjamin Franklin immediately looks at what's happening. It's like, okay, look at his design. Yeah, this is a really good idea. And he immediately puts his system to work. And of course, Benjamin Franklin knows that if he's going to get people interested in one of these public projects, what he needs to do is write some little pieces in the newspaper, start people thinking about the topic, not just spring it on them, knock on their front door, hey, XYZ, they're not going to be interested. You need to kind of get the idea percolating in the community first. So that's what he does. He writes some pieces, little pamphlet-y things, and then, as soon as he puts his name behind it, boom. But here's an interesting section. They raise a certain quantity of money, but they definitely are going to need more. Benjamin Franklin is part of the assembly, and he knows it's like it's going to take it. This really needs is some assembly money, some public monies to come into this. It's like maybe this can be a kind of half and half. And if he's coming up with this idea here, if this is the first time somebody comes up with this idea, then this is pretty incredible because they still do this today, and it's a really neat idea. He says. On this, I formed my plan, and asking leave to bring in a bill for incorporating the contributions according to the prayer of their petition, so petitioning the government to, add some money to this hospital, and granting them some blank sum of money, which leave was obtained chiefly on considering that the House could throw the bill out if they did not like it. I drew it so as to make the important clause a conditional one, viz., and it be enacted by the authority aforesaid that when said contributors shall have met and chosen their managers and treasurer, and shall have raised by their contributions a capital stock of, fill in the blank, value, the yearly interest of which is to be applied to the accommodation of the poor in the said hospital, free of charge of diet, attendance, advice, and medicines, and shall make the same appear to the satisfaction of the Speaker of the Assembly, time being, that then it shall and may be lawful for the said Speaker, and he is thereby required to sign an order on the treasurer for the payment of £2,000 et cetera, et cetera. So it's something like, okay, here's the bill for the government. No, the government doesn't give any money until the community comes up with a certain amount of money, so that even the interest will, if you have that much money, just the interest on that money will keep the thing going. So that the government's basically putting in sort of a lump sum right off the front, and then all its private means are already set, and going. And he uses this against both directions. He used that clause, hey, if the public doesn't come up with the money, then the assembly doesn't have to pay. And the assemblymen are like, oh yeah, we can vote for this, and they probably won't raise the money, and so we won't have to pay, right? And then to raise the money in the public, it's like, hey, the government isn't going to pay their amount unless we come up with the money. So he uses that kind of both directions. He helps that conditional clause helps the assembly, like, okay, we'll vote for this. Maybe it won't happen, and if it does happen, it will continue to sustain itself. And then he uses on the public side, he's like, this is like a matching donation. Right? So we hear of this matching donation all the time now. It's like, if you give $10, we'll get $20 because some other outside foundation's gonna double your pledge, basically. So that's what he talked to the public about. It's like, hey, if you give this money, twice that amount is going to come into this. So he really kind of came up with a great plan there to make this happen, especially when you're kind of looking for that both public and private thing kind of working together. Amazing thought process there. I don't know if he stole it from somebody else, but here he is. He says, we urge the conditional promise of the law as an additional motive to give, since every man's donation would be doubled. So that's really neat.
So here's a quick question in the chat real quick. How prevalent were hospitals in the time period?
So, I think this spells it out. In 1750, there was no hospital in Philadelphia. So they're not popular at all. There's probably military hospitals, whenever there's a big fortification, but those generally aren't, necessarily open to the public. So public hospitals are non-existent. And even in Great Britain, you're going to find some of those, but they tend to be like this one, a charitable thing. Today we think about hospitals, and not very many of our hospitals are fully charitable. Even in this case where he said, the law was even written so that the public, there was enough money there so that the people who came to the hospital didn't have to pay for food or for lodging, or for their medicine or their medical care. So those hospitals, if you went to the hospital, it was free. That's what that hospital was set up for. We don't think about going to the hospital and it just being free. And I think most of medical care, the reason why they didn't need a hospital was because, if you needed medical care, the doctor came to your house if you had enough money. So the hospital was for somebody who didn't have enough money, couldn't afford to bring a doctor and have all that care done in their house, basically.
Parson John and Maggie are in the chat. Number one, we want to thank Parson John for joining us on the live stream. Was it 2 weeks ago? Or
Yes.
1 week ago, okay.
Right.
And secondly, they said the first medical school in the colonies was around 1765.
Right.
So that's a medical school.
Right, and this is 1751.
Right.
So, it takes a whole 10 years later before we even have a college for that. And yeah, hold on, Frank and Carol, because we're going to get to the part where he's talking about sweeping streets. And, we were talking about doing dirty jobs, right? Mm-hmm. So dirty jobs comes right in here in this section of the autobiography here. So here he talks about the hospital being built. A convenient and handsome building was soon erected. The institution has by constant experience been found useful and flourishes to this day, and I do not remember any of my political maneuvers, the success of which gave me at the time more pleasure, or wherein, after thinking of it, I more easily excused myself of having made some use of cunning. So he did think, like, okay, I may have been sailing a little close to the wind with this little, it's like, okay, how can I make the assembly vote for this thing? They don't think it's gonna, go, and then I could use that conditional thing. But I don't know. I mean, okay, maybe it was cunning. Obviously today we wouldn't think a second's thought about that being a sort of ethical way to make this happen. Maybe there's a little more in behind the scenes that he's not telling us. That maybe, I don't know. Probably not. I think it was probably just because it was the first time anybody experimented with a thing like that. And so maybe he thought it wasn't very on the up and up. So we see this success with the hospital, and a Reverend Gilbert Tennant comes to him and requests that Benjamin Franklin help him get the funds to build a new Presbyterian church, as he says, to be used for the congregation that he had gathered among the Presbyterians who were originally disciples of Mr. Whitefield. So, Benjamin Franklin probably at this point, it's like, well, I can't do this over and over and over again. And he kind of says that. He says, the guy asked for help, and he was unwilling. I am unwilling to make myself disagreeable to my fellow citizens by too frequently soliciting their contributions, so I absolutely refused. But then the Gilbert Tennant decides that's like, okay, you're not going to help me with that. Give me a list of names of people that would give money. And Benjamin Franklin's like, no, I'm not going to do that either. I mean, that's almost the same thing. But lastly, it's like, okay, you won't do that, then give me your advice. And Benjamin Franklin's advice is just perfect. He says, that I will do. That I can do. In the first place, I advise you to apply to all those to whom will give something. Okay, so they're going to give something, then go talk to them. Next, go to those whom you are uncertain whether they will give anything or not, and show them the list of those who have given. Okay, that makes sense. Lastly, do not neglect to go to those you are sure will give nothing, for some of them you might be mistaken, so they might give some anyway. And it's like, so in other words, go to everyone. It's like, go to the ones will give, go to the ones you don't think but might give, and then go to the ones you don't know will give. It's like, well, there's nobody that doesn't, he says.
But it's also, it's really interesting because he's using like what people are taught how to sell right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
right.
He knows exactly how to motivate people. Mm-hmm. Because after you have that list of, look, all these people are doing it, that's the most persuasive thing. Right.
Your neighbor's doing this. Right. He thinks it's a good idea.
Right. Why don't you think it's a good idea? Right. Your neighbor does on both
what?
sides.
Do you hate religion? Is that it? Is that the problem here? Right. So he did so, for he asked everybody, and he obtained a much larger sum than he expected, with which he erected the capacious and very elegant meeting house that stands in Arch Street. So he was very successful. Probably used Benjamin Franklin's advice right there and worked out great for him. So we move right on to, here we go. Here we're getting to the start of the idea of dirty jobs here, okay? Our city, though laid out with beautiful regularity, the streets large, straight, and crossing each other at right angles, probably not like the rest of the world, right, had the disgrace of suffering those streets to remain long unpaved, and in wet weather the wheels of heavy carts plowed them into a quagmire so that it was difficult to cross them, and in dry weather the dust was offensive. I had lived near what was called the Jersey Market, and saw with pain the inhabitants wading in mud while purchasing their provisions. A strip of ground down the middle of that market was at length paved with brick, so that, being once in the market, they had firm footing. But there were often but were often over shoes in dirt to get there. Can you imagine like walking in 4 inches of mud to get there? By talking and writing on the subject, I was at length instrumental in getting the street paved with stone between Market and the bricked foot pavement that was on each side next to the houses. This for some time gave an easy access to the market dry shod, but the rest of the street not being paved, whenever a carriage came out of the mud upon this pavement, it shook off and left all its dirt, so it was soon covered with mire, which was not removed, the city as yet not having scavengers. So, what's a scavenger, right? Who's gonna, in the time period, taking out the trash, or in this case, taking, stuff away out of the streets so that you can, get through? After some inquiry, I found a poor, industrious man who was willing to undertake keeping the pavement clean by sweeping it twice a week, carrying off the dirt from before all the neighbors' doors for a sum of 6 pence per month to be paid by each house. Now, I think he's talking about just his neighborhood, but maybe it's just that area. But, here we have this whole, I don't think we can just fathom. Again, we live in a paved world, right? So we've got sidewalks, we've got pavements. This county that we're in here has fewer dirt roads than any other county in Indiana, at least until the recent past. So we don't have to deal with walking through mud ankle deep. And this was Philadelphia. It was one of the biggest cities in North America. And here, if it rains, you're going to be tracking dirt everywhere. So there was it was impossible. And even when you did get the streets paved, then the dirt came in on wagon wheels, and you were still walking in just lots and lots and lots of dirt.
I love that every time he comes up with a solution, there's a responsibility on the community to take part in that.
Right.
Whether it's the hospital or it's the street sweeper, there's a portion of that at least.
Right, and he didn't say, well, we're going to have the city pay for the street sweeper. He said, well, we'll have a subscription. Each house person's going to have to, come up with a certain amount of money. And I suppose if they didn't, it's like, well, we're going to stack the mud right in front of your spot. So there was this, so here there's a big city, and there's just this little part that's paved right where the market is, and then they paved a little bit more, and then he says, okay, we gotta get serious about this. After some time, I drew a bill for paving the city and brought it into the assembly. It was just before I went to England in 1757 and did not pass until I was gone. Then with alterations, it's like, but then he moves on. With alterations in the mode of assessment, which I thought not for the better, but with the additional provision for lighting as well as paving the streets. So, again, we take for granted the idea of having street lights at all. So it's like, not only is it, muddy, but there's no light at night, so you can't walk without, it's like, even if you wanted to avoid the mud puddles, you couldn't see them. Someone even has in here, it was by a private person, the late Mr. John Clifton, his giving a sample of the utility of lamps by placing one at his door, that people were first impressed with the idea of enlightening all the city. So it took one person to say, okay, I'm always going to put a lamp out here so that people can see in front of my house. And, it was just by one person's example that everyone said, yes, we need to have this whole lamp thing figured out. We need to be able to see at night walking down the street. They got street lamps, but apparently they were like the street lamps that were in London, and they had round globes. And I don't know whether he means the glass of pane was round like this or actually globular, sort of like that. But apparently the design was bad. So there wasn't air that came in from the bottom. And so the whole thing would fill up with smoke, and it's like, okay, you still have fire in there, but the light can't get out because there's soot all over in the inside. So he redesigns the street lamps with 4 sides, because a round piece of glass too is also expensive. If it breaks, you got to replace the whole glass globe thing. He said, well, let's make them square so they have flat panes of glass that are easy to replace, and let's make sure that they have a long chimney on them so it draws all the soot away. Because if you're running a candle, or probably even any kind of lamp in the time period, even if it's oil, the wicks they have in the time period are not like the candle wicks today. So the candle wicks today we have are woven, braided very, very specifically. If you braid that and you make one of those braid strands just a little tighter than all the rest, then the wick automatically bends over as it burns. So you can see this candle here. You can see the wick is bending like this, right? And the wicks in the time period were not made like that. It wasn't until the 19th century that some genius said, hey, we need to figure out a different way to do this. So all the wicks would just stay straight up, and it would cause soot. And the candle or whatever, even oil, is going to burn terribly. It's just, you have all this soot going up. And you'd have to come along and trim the wicks all the time to keep that from causing a whole bunch of soot. So even in your house, if you're lighting by candles, you have to be going around constantly, every once in a while. I don't know exactly how often. It depends on the quality of your candles. So you got to go along and trim all these wicks to keep huge quantities of soot from building up on your ceiling. You might as well paint your ceiling black because you're gonna have all this soot going up there, even if it wasn't for smoke coming out of your fireplace. So he's like, how can we make this chimney to take that soot away so we don't have to clean the lamps constantly? Because nobody's gonna go around like trimming the wicks on your street lamps too. So even in this time period, while London had some of these street lights, they weren't very good because they would get all sooty and you couldn't see out of them. He says, I therefore suggested the composing of them with 4 flat panes with a long funnel to draw up the smoke and crevices admitting air below to facilitate the ascent of smoke, and by this means they were kept clean and did not grow dark in a few hours as the London lamps do. And he goes on talking about the lamps and cleaning them out. Who's going to do the work of lighting them and keeping them going? So there's this section here. So he gets off on a rabbit trail with this lighting, but he goes back to the street idea. I mentioned of these improvements put to me in mind of one that I proposed when in London to Dr. Fothergill, who is among the best men I have known and a great promoter of useful projects. I'd observed that the streets, when dry, were never swept, and the light dust carried away, but it was suffered to accumulate till wet weather reduced it to mud, and then, after lying some days so deep on the pavement that there was no crossing it, but in paths kept clean by poor people with brooms, it was with great labor raked together and thrown up into carts open above, the sides of which suffered some of the slush at every jolt in the pavement to shake out and fall, sometimes to the great annoyance of foot passengers. The reason given for not sweeping the dust away was that the dust would fly into the windows of shops and houses. So how do we keep our street clean? How do we keep this? If we sweep the dust up when it's dry, we create dust clouds and it goes in your window and everybody's windows are open. If we rake it up when it's wet, the carts are jostling around and all this stuff, mud sloshes out on people. It's just like not good. So he comes up with an idea for how to make the cart better. which is interesting. But he says, an accidental occurrence had instructed me how much sweeping might be done in a little time. I found at my door in Craven Street one morning a poor woman sweeping my pavement with a birch broom. She appeared very pale and feeble, as just coming out of a fit of sickness. I asked who employed her to sweep there, and she said nobody, but she says, I am very poor and in distress, and I sweep before gentle folks' doors in hopes that they will give me something. I bid her to sweep the whole street clean, and I would give her a shilling. This was at 9 o'clock. At 12, she came for the shilling. From the slowness I saw at first in her working, I could scarce believe that the work was done so soon, and I sent my servant to examine it, who reported that the whole street was swept perfectly clean and all the dust placed in the gutter, which was in the middle, and the next rain would wash it quite away, so that the pavement and even the kennels were perfectly clean. I then judged that if that feeble woman could sweep such a street in 3 hours, a strong, active man might do it in half the time. And here we have another one of those examples of what do people do when they aren't capable of doing a regular job. Or, in this case, you're sick, maybe you've lost your position. There's all kinds of situations where people are kind of, at the very bottom of society, and they need to eat. What are they gonna do to, stay out of the poorhouse? And this woman goes around sweeping in front of houses, just hoping that people will give them money. But it's something that needed to be done. So it's like, okay, somebody needs to do this. Sort of like, I guess, today, it snows a bunch and the kids go out with shovels, and shovel in front of other people's houses or mow for the neighbors, right? In this case, like, well, I'll sweep your street for you. Who's going to say, go away, little old lady. I don't want you sweeping in front of my house. I'm sure plenty of people did, but Benjamin Franklin's like, nah, sweep the whole street. Let's take care of this the right way. Okay, and this, then he goes on and he talks about this idea of the gutter, right? He mentioned the gutter here in this street is down the middle of the street. And streets in London, sometimes that gutter isn't just, we think of gutters for just like rain, and in this case, dirt on the street, and that's what's going on. This gutter that's in the middle of the street here in London is not just a simple gutter for rainwater. It is a gutter for every yuckiness, right? People are emptying out their chamber pots and everything else in that gutter. But the gutter's in the middle of the street instead of on either side. So today we have gutters, like I'll have a sidewalk and I'll have a gutter down here and then the street. And the street is crowned so that the water goes and goes down to the edges. And he's like, no, that's not good because it separates the water. So half water goes on one side, half the water goes on the other side, and there isn't enough rain sometimes to wash it all away. So if all the stuff goes to the center, there'll be enough water to wash that all away. And of course, here we're not just washing away a little bit of dirt, we're washing away who knows what, let's just say, down the middle of that street. So here they want, it's like, no, let's have one gutter, concentrates everything in one spot, and the rain will take it away. And he actually makes this proposal it's like, yeah, let's not have two gutters, let's have one gutter. That's a good idea. He also comes up with the idea of these carts that are carrying the mud away. The carts are joggling around, and the paving on these streets isn't this wonderful smooth asphalt stuff. It's these cobblestones, like driving over 2-inch humps, like driving over speed bumps continuously, right? Except probably worse. So he says, why don't we, instead of using this cart where you have to you shovel this mud, and you up over your head into this open cart, right? And mud's flying everywhere, dust is flying everywhere, it's joggling out. He's like, no, what we need are sleds. So this is down on the ground. Just two little runners, and the box is on top of those two little runners. So it's not joggling around anymore. And if we leave it an open lattice bottom, and then we just put straw in the bottom, then we throw that mud in there and the water can run out and it will weigh less because most of what's in there is water weight anyway. So, he even comes up with I don't know if anybody ever did that, right? And that's the other problem. It's like, well, I thought of this great idea, but until you actually do it, you don't know whether it'll work. Maybe something else would be maybe it'd be even worse, right? All the mud would run out and whatever. So he really spends a lot of time talking about how are you going to clean the streets, even to the point of possibly having, was it the street lighters or some situation where you would have the opportunity to have a person in charge and with the tools to have itinerant people or poor people in this case coming and doing some of the street stuff. Boy, I wish I could find that. It's in here because it was really interesting. It's like, okay, since this person's already out in the street, let's have them in charge of helping other people. Here we go. For more effectual in cleaning and keeping clean the streets of London and Westminster, it is proposed that the several watchmen be contracted with to have the dust swept up in the dry seasons and the mud raked up at other times, each in the several streets and lanes of his round, and that they, being the watchmen, be furnished with brooms and other proper instruments for these purposes, to keep at their respective stands ready to furnish the poor people that they may be employed in the service. So here's the watchman, policeman, I guess, since they didn't really have those. But it's like, yeah, they'll be in charge. They'll have some equipment there. And it's like, okay, there's a poor person who needs a job. Okay, tonight you can do some of the street sweeping and, shoveling up of the mud off the streets. So it's one of those little side jobs.
I think it's incredible that somebody who was interested in things like figuring out what's going on with electricity and making hospitals and printing presses and that sort of thing is also interested with how do we keep the street clean?
Yeah, right.
It's not just, he just likes to look in and make everything that he sees better.
Well, I think he sees a problem, right? And he wants to fix it, right? And it doesn't matter what the problem is, unless, of course, it's, being a court judge and it's like, okay.
So Heather Torrey is in Super Chat. Thanks for the discussion of this interesting chapter. Thank you, Heather. And somebody else said this chapter should be titled The War on Mud and How to Wage It.
Yeah, he certainly is. And it was a problem, right? I don't think we can fathom how bad a problem it was. And here they have fancy shoes. It's not like everybody's walking around in rubber boots, right? Got these fancy buckle shoes and everything. Ladies have these, super fancy embroidered shoes. I don't know whether people carried them on their backs or something because it's like, I'm not going to walk in that mud. He talks about being a postmaster and the difficulty he had with it, that he was sort of, you have to do this job and we're gonna give you a certain quantity of money to do it. And he's like, to do it right, really it needs more investment at the front end. So he invests to make it a more profitable thing or just more efficient, right? Even though it was more than they allotted for it, knowing that later on that was going to work out a lot better for him. So that in fact did work out well. He spent more money in the first couple of years, and then after that it was a much more profitable venture. Somehow at some point, and you could tell it's like one of his little virtues here of not being angry. He gets kind of booted from the postmaster's job. and he's like, let's see, he says, before I was displaced by a freak of the ministers, of which I shall speak hereafter. In other words, they're kind of capricious. Well, we don't want you to do it anymore, right? We had brought it to yield 3 times as much clear revenue to the crown as the post offices in Ireland. So instead of it being a money loser, he made it a money maker for the crown. But of course, you know, then somebody else got the job, and then he says, then they didn't receive any money from it after that because they didn't do it as well as Benjamin Franklin did it. It's like, oh, Benjamin Franklin.
I think there's an "I told you so" in there.
Yeah, I think so. Being the business of the post office occasioned my taking a journey this year to New England, where the College of Cambridge, of their own motion, presented me with the degree of Master of Arts. Yale College in Connecticut had before made me a similar compliment. Thus, without studying in any college, I came to partake of their honors. They were conferred in consideration of my improvements and discoveries in the electric branch of natural philosophy. And we're going to stop there because we jump into the French and Indian War after that, and that's probably going to be the whole next section. But we're moving along. We're moving along. It's taking a little bit.
Quick promotion. It looks like Parson and Maggie are going to have their Dirty Jobs Museum set up later this month, June 18th through 19th, at Compass Inn Museum, in June 20th through 25th. Through 26th at Fort Loudon, Pennsylvania.
So where's the Compass Inn Museum?
I think I'm not sure. Let me see if it says. I might have missed something. They're both in Pennsylvania.
So Frank and Carol, Maggie, and Parson John, they've got this whole museum of jobs just like those street sweepers and scavengers, all the different kinds of jobs that people could do when they didn't have a regular job. They didn't want to go to the poorhouse, and these are kind of like a day-to-day kind of a job, or a hit and miss, seasonal kinds of things that you could do with basically no skills. If you were willing to get dirty, or if you were willing to do something a little whatever, these jobs will get you by. So really neat kind of a series of presentations. It's a little museum with little cards to read and kind of example of what that was, a little interesting props. So you want to be a rat catcher, you want to be a this or that. Some neat things, and talk about people not wanting to do jobs, right? Particular kind of job. Well, some of them were pretty rough. It's like, who's gonna clean out your outhouse for you? Well,
right.
Good question. Yeah.
And we have begun discussions with Parson, John, and Maggie about how we can bring those to the YouTube channel so that we can get that to a wider audience. But you really do need to go see this museum in person if you are able.
Right. It's fun. Okay.
Oh, one more.
Yes.
There's a descendant from John Adams who's wondering if we're ever planning to cover any John Adams information.
We might. Really good question. We generally kind of deal with the stuff of regular people. But it turns out that, people like John Adams were, just because they were famous doesn't mean they weren't regular people. But we don't tend to spend as much time in, political history or, famous people as we do with just standard material culture and everyday life. So, but there's no reason why we wouldn't cover some of that too. Anything else? We're good to go. So again, if you're interested in one of our print catalogs, you can find that on our website, or the Benjamin Franklin book. But you don't need those things to enjoy what we do here on the channel. I really thank you for being in this live stream today. This stuff is just as important to us today, or more so in many ways, than a lot of things that are going on in the world. Because this is like, like regular basic life that's underneath there. What we do on the channel and understanding how people lived 250 years ago is important. So I'm glad that you are here and enjoying this live stream today. I hope you have a wonderful day, and thank you so much for your support. Thanks for watching.